she was doing this heavy earth moving equipment. And her coworkers were not very friendly. There was a lot of hostility in the workplace. Management was not very friendly. And the leadership of the union was not very friendly. So she was feeling a lot of isolation. And she had this poster, it's called the ABCs of Organizing. Okay? I'm not going to let y'all read it now, because it distracts me. But she had that up, or someone had it up in the work shed, in the tool shed, and she said when things got too hard for her, she would just take a break, go in there and stand in front of it. 10 minutes standing in front of it. Said, it reminded me of why I do this, why I'm putting up with this shit. You know? So again, it comes down to the question of personal emotional support, and all the way up to the question of quickly polarizing a situation in order to shift the balance of power. It's just a question of going in and saying, well, what's needed? And I think I'll just give you two more examples just because they cover different areas. This poster is called A Century of Struggle. It tells a story. In there are about 600 or 700 little images of different struggles that happened in the U.S. during the 20th century, starting 1900 at the bottom, going up to 2000 at the top. Okay? And the way this came about is that, you know, in 1970, during the anti-war movement, students at Jackson State and Kent State universities were shot down by the National Guard and killed. Okay? And the 20 years later, in 1990, some organizers wanted to do a commemoration of that and asked me to make the poster. And so I made a poster which showed a lot of people in all the struggles that had happened during those 20 years, between 1970 and 1990. Showed a lot of people carrying signs and waving, you know, banners that told those stories. And what I ran into a friend who said that, you know, in Seattle, she had this on her apartment door in the kitchen. And she had a young housemate who didn't know much about movement history but was interested. And every morning before he went to school and she went to work, they'd sit in the kitchen as a little ritual, drink a cup of coffee, and he'd point to one of the pictures on the poster, and she'd tell him a story. You know? And so this is kind of grew out of that as another version. This is never going to make any waves, but it'll create a lot of ripples. Anyone has that up? It just tells a lot of stories. And my hope is that anyone who lived in that century, if they can't find themselves in that picture, they'll find something that was pretty close to what they were doing. Okay? So, when you control the story in a struggle, you control the momentum of the movement and the direction of movement. I mean, you can see that now, I think, in what's happening in the Middle East, where the Israeli government is very conscious that it's lost control of the story and is in irreversible decline. And in fact, a revolutionary leader and intellectual, Iqbal Ahmed, in 1967 proposed that the Palestinian struggle use tactics like the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, the Bilin actions that are going on now, saying if you do that, it'll divide your enemies, and the Israeli state will not last 10 years. And now, finally, we're seeing those things implemented, and we're seeing that kind of result. So controlling the story is a major piece of strategy.
What do you mean by controlling the story?
Well, meaning that, for example, were you here when I gave the example of the immigration struggle? So that if the story being told is that these brown, dark folk from across the border are coming and stealing our jobs, then clearly it's mobilizing people to stop them from doing that. You've got to put up a wall or something. And that means that workers whose jobs are in jeopardy are going to be pissed at those people coming across the border. If the story is being told that corporations are crushing, setting fire to the rural economy of Mexico, and people are having to escape for their lives so that corporations can make more profits on both sides of the border, then that puts workers, immigrants, and farmers all on the same side. So that's what I mean. It's sort of how do people understand what it is that's happening? You know, and when you have that, I don't want to go into this right now, I don't think, unless, you know, later want to move in that direction. But what you do when you control the story is you put your opponent into a helpless giant situation where whatever they do is wrong. You know, for example, if we were to introduce, and this is really cultural warfare, this isn't legislative work, but if we had a friendly congressperson introduce legislation saying that any employee of the United States government, employee or elected official or contractor of the United States government who knowingly falsifies information or hides information for the purpose of getting us into a military conflict is guilty of a crime equivalent to treason. So, you introduce that, and what are the Democrats and Republicans going to do? They can't support it because they gotta lie. But if they oppose it, they're admitting that they gotta lie. You know, and that wakens up people, constituencies who are really pissed that they just lost their kid. You know, and there's ways that we get the message out through our communities, through our own networks, through the ethnic press and others. But anyway, I don't want to go into that whole strategic thing, but all I'm saying is that the things that we can do tactically and strategically that makes them help us tell the story we want to tell. I approach any struggle from the perspective that our enemies only exist for the purpose of helping us beat them. And our job is to just pay attention quietly for a while so they will reveal how they're going to help us. And the first thing is they tell us where they're vulnerable, and then we take it from there. So what I'd like to do now is take a few minutes and just ask you all for some stories from your own experience of how some of this may have played out in terms of creative ways in which you've experienced struggles through the use of story or cultural or creative tactics, you know. And just to broaden it more, the meanest creative tactic I ever heard was the clerical workers in Harvard who put themselves, they gathered in shifts, they kept circulating in shifts outside of the chancellor's office windows, singing the Barney the Dinosaur song. And they said they would not stop until he agreed to meet with them. And this is, we can get fishy? So anyway, I just want to hear about either situations where you wished you'd used a tactic like this, or just something, and this will give us an idea too of what kind of struggles are represented in the room here. What kind of movements you all are from and so forth. Yeah.